A couple of things that I want to mention. The full bracket is on the screen right now. As you can tell, it's a lot shorter. The last bracket we did was 32 games long. This one's only 8. We spent a lot more time dissecting every game. For this bracket and for more specific brackets like this moving forward, we're going to keep them a lot more condensed. So this whole series is going to be only 4 episodes, 2 for the first round and then 1 for the next 2 rounds. And we're going to try to limit it to 7 minutes. May or may not happen. Sometimes we can ramble, but we're going to try to go for that 7-minute area.
Ocarina of Time and Wind Waker.
Yeah, we can extend it every now and then.
Yeah.
But, I mean, if we have a matchup we get more passionate about, certainly we're not going to cut it off cold turkey. But, you know, that's the goal we're about aiming for. So I'm excited for this. I feel like all 3 of us come at this from different perspectives, and we'll hear more about that later. Nick's not a huge horror fan. I love survival horror, weaponry type games. Travis likes horror games that don't have weapons, that are more, running away and hiding. And so we all kind of have different takes on the horror genre. So it'll be really interesting to see what we end up deciding is the best one. One thing I want to mention before we get started in the first matchup, this is kind of me explaining rules. We are not calling this the best horror game. Certain horror games that are amazing were left off of this bracket because we don't have connections to it. We picked 8 games that all 3 of us at least have some sort of connection to in one way or another. So this is, as a group, our favorite horror game, not what we believe is the best horror game. I just want to make sure that's clear because, I know there's a couple games that people really like that aren't on the list, and we might make some pretty crazy decisions. Just know this is because it's the 3 of us, ours opinion. We're not trying to say this one's objectively the best as much, more as this is the one that we believe as a group is more fun to play. With that being said, I wasted enough time going over rules. The first matchup we're going to be doing here is the 1 seed versus the 8 seed. We seeded them based on Metacritic scores just to make it kind of fair. And that is Bloodborne versus Until Dawn. Bloodborne, for a lot of you that know, is the sort of the Dark Souls type From Software game where you have to fight really insanely hard bosses. And Bloodborne was picked specifically because it's a bloody nightmare to look at. These creatures are disgustingly ugly. And it's more of a dark and creepy environment. And it's facing off against Until Dawn, which is a very choose-your-own-adventure type game. It falls in the vein of Telltale games, but it's definitely scary. There's a lot of people that get, heads chopped off. And it's a very cool game because every character can die or every character can survive. It's definitely a very free adventure. And so, different styles of games. And I'm curious, kind of how we're going to decide which one fits the horror theme the best. Does anyone want to start off with a point about either of these 2 games?
I'll start off. Oh, no, Travis, you got it.
Okay. So one thing that when we were doing our anticipated releases for the month, you were saying how your Moons of Madness horror games don't usually focus too much on graphics, and I think that's something that Until Dawn actually did focus on, because as I was playing, I was like, this guy really looks familiar. Why do I? Oh, and I'm like, oh, that's frickin' Ward from Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. That's how I know who you are. And then I'm like, oh my gosh, that's Hayden Panettiere. That's ridiculous.
Hayden Panettiere, come on. He's on those Neutrogena commercials.
Save the cheerleader, save the world.
All right, Until Dawn wins. Hayden Panettiere was in the game. Moving on.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, she's got Neutrogena.
And, if you made her die, then you're an awful person and you played it wrong.
Very
true.
But I don't think it's fair completely to say that only Until Dawn focuses on graphics.
No, I'm just saying,
does it, but in a different way.
Right. I'm not saying that Bloodborne's graphics aren't good, because, it does an extraordinary job at making that world super creepy. But, Until Dawn, I feel is one of the few horror games that actually, go for the hyper-realism graphics versus let's just make this really super dark atmosphere. And, it starts out with you're literally going out drinking with your friends at a cabin, and then shit happens.
Yeah. It's hard. I feel like graphically, if we're going to start with that point and compare, my gut's leaning toward Bloodborne. I love the creativity in some of those. But the very first boss you see in that game is this giant, disgusting hound monster. Everything in that game is just disturbing and creepy. And I don't know.
The plagued townfolk. It really is disturbing.
And it's the art, the designers for that game. I don't know in what nightmare world they live in where they can imagine creatures like this. It blows my mind. But they're just all ugly and disgusting, and it's perfect. I don't know the creativity that goes into that is great. And it's hard. Until Dawn's bad guys, the Wendigo, they looked really detailed in the game, but I didn't see them, and I wasn't like blown away by their design the way I was in Bloodborne. I mean, it's hard. The creativity that went into Bloodborne and the enemy design was like phenomenal. And again, it's hard to make a comparison because we're comparing a game with giant demons and just people. But I think Bloodborne it had a style that like never left in my head. Like I can't unsee the things I saw in Bloodborne.
Yeah. Also, I was going to mention about one thing that is going to kind of be weird that it's going to be hard to compare is really how fear is incorporated into these games through game mechanics specifically. Because Bloodborne, I would say, is more active in terms of you can fight them. Yes, it has a very dark, creepy atmosphere. It has these town folk that when you just see them, you're just like, all right, this is messed up. Again, like, I don't know whoever thought of this, but it really does a great job of painting a beautiful atmosphere of how messed up this world is. But you're able to fight them. You're able to fight your way through, and you're able to be more active in that case. And I'm wondering, does that do a really good job of conveying, like, the fear that these games should?
I think that's going to come up in, I think, a debate that we're going to have later between two games that have that exact problem. I don't think it's a problem. I think no matter how much you can fight something, when you see something that big, especially with how difficult Bloodborne is, you go into it still like, holy crap, I don't know if I can do this, I don't know how many Bloodborne boss fights I did where I'm like, this is not going to be possible to beat. I mean, this thing is a giant monster. So it's more overcoming your fear. But even in Until Dawn, this is hard to say. QuickTime events, to me, take a lot of the fear out of it. Yeah. I don't have to worry about an enemy popping out and killing me because I know I just have to press left when the prompt shows up. Other than that, you're not going to die.
Right.
So
and then especially because
it takes fear away.
Yeah, especially because two of the characters are like crucial for most of the story events, so they pretty much have armor up until the very end.
Right.
So you don't even have to actually get the quick events right, like for the first half of the game.
Yeah. I think that game nails the psychological horror part more.
Oh,
where,
yeah.
You have friends that are, dying, and there's a section of the game where you have to choose, are you going to kill yourself or your friend, right? Or else both of you die. So it's more of a game that messes with your head more than, having enemies that are impossible to overcome, right? I think when we get to Outlast 2 and stuff, we're going to see more of that side. This is more like you have to make a very difficult decision that stresses you out. It's definitely a psychological horror versus Bloodborne, which is, I guess in its own way, a psychological horror, but it's also scary in terms of giant destructive monsters that you're trying to take down. So
I mean, Until Dawn really just more leans towards the kind of slasher flicker kind of feel of the game. Bloodborne is just more active, more, hey, there is a giant beast in front of me, but I can do something about it. So yeah, it is still going to give you that. I would say both of them will still give you that initial shock factor, but it's kind of the after effect that would really stick with you. It's really, all right, am I going to have this in the back of my head of, okay, I really just messed up and I had a genuine connection with that person and they're now gone.
Yeah.
Versus I have a blade and I'm going to do something about this in front of me. Sorry, bleep that, please. But yeah, so it is kind of similar, but at the same time, I think the biggest difference, besides the whole hyper-realism graphics, is the fact that one of them you're taking more of an active role to defend yourself and being able to take down the monster. The other one is more you have an impossible choice. You got to choose one still.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I mean, I think the biggest thing for me is, I love psychological horror games, and I think Until Dawn was great at it, but I think the flaw with Until Dawn is the only fear in it was stress. And I don't even think I was necessarily afraid at any point playing that game, only because, as we mentioned, fear doesn't work as much if you know you cannot die as long as you press the buttons that show up on screen, right? At the end of the day, nothing's going to pop out of nowhere and take you down, which I do think alleviates that fear. In Bloodborne, you can fight back, but there's a threat of dying. And Until Dawn, there's no real threat of dying.
Yeah, pretty much the only stressful event was when you actually had a decision of, do I do this specific thing versus this specific?
Right, and I think in the grand scheme of things, another thing to mention is Bloodborne is so long. It drags this incredible gameplay out and out, and Until Dawn was a fair length, but it was still a relatively short game. I think Bloodborne is such an expansive experience. Can Until Dawn's choices and decisions impact that, right? Because
Yeah,
in terms of
plus-
replayability,
Yeah,
which one?
plus Bloodborne gets right into it, whereas Until Dawn takes a considerable amount of time to like introduce the characters, kind of get a feel of who they are, to then kind of set up how they're changing throughout the story.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd say that replayability is the one thing that Until Dawn will definitely have over Bloodborne, but it's because of that replayability that might hurt it, because if you're playing it again and you want to see what the other choices are, don't you lose some of the fear when you're replaying it?
Well, at that
'Cause you
point,
have an idea of what happens.
Yeah, you're not afraid anymore. At that point, you're like intentionally doing dumb things now,
Yeah,
to
he's
see
like, what's going to happen
happens.
next?
So, yeah, you're right. Like, there's replayability, but that replayability doesn't have any fear in it anymore.
Yeah.
So that's something to think about.
So, we're around that time. Should we
Yeah.
just go and vote?
Let's do it. I'm excited to vote for new games now.
I know, it's
Right?
going to be cool.
So, who wants to vote first?
Might as well start it. Hey, the person who doesn't like horror games is voting for Bloodborne.
Yeah, I was surprised.
It's the main point that I was saving till the very end. It really is the replayability. I really don't think, and I would call it more of a fault of the genre, I don't really think horror games really should have as much replayability, like in the way of Travis with Outlast. You can have the jump scares, you know when it's going to happen. Then you're just waiting for other people's reactions. You already know what's going to happen.
Yep.
You're not as scared, and just like you guys did in the race, you're racing through it. Replayability, I don't think is as important in horror games, and that's why I think Bloodborne is better.
I'll vote second. I think, I think Nick has a point, but even if Nick didn't have a point, Bloodborne is if you replayed Bloodborne, it would still be just as terrifying the second time because you still have to defeat these giant-ass monsters. So replayability, though not important for horror games, works a lot better in Bloodborne than it does Until Dawn, even though Until Dawn offers more replayability, options. Bloodborne will have more fear in a replay, and so I feel like in that sense, that's one of the few games where maybe it does necessarily work a little bit. But Bloodborne is just too expansive. It was too beautiful in such a horrifying way that it's hard for me to vote against. So I'm going to vote Bloodborne.
Oh, it's okay. I'm also going Bloodborne. I was doing my best for Until Dawn, but
Sweet.
I mean, this is kind of the Star Fox of this story,
Yeah.
where I knew it had no chance, and
Yeah.
because like I did enjoy it as a game, but like we were saying, there's not really much replayability, and then you're not that scared throughout the whatchamacallit, the button hitting.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. The QuickTime events.
That's the one. Yep, QuickTime events.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, next matchup.
Yep.
Just so we can keep these things going, we got
Yeah.
Dead Space and
Resident Evil 7. So
ooh, good one.
this is I'm really excited for this one. So this one is two more action-oriented shooters. Dead Space came onto the scene and just like it swept house in terms of how gory and horrifying this game was. You want to talk about games that are just nightmare fuel? This one is it. It's completely dark. You have enemies popping out of vents, popping out of pipes, just coming out of nowhere. Enemies that you had to be kind of smart to kill. So it's not just a normal horror game, but you actually had to plan and scope things out a little bit better. Resident Evil 7 is a very modern horror game. Certainly, there's action in it, but it wasn't a very action-heavy game. There were a lot of parts where you were just trying to sneak by and figure things out. Dead Space has a lot more ammunition. Resident Evil 7 forced you to save it. The action in Resident Evil 7 was a lot slower than Dead Space. So while we have two action survival horror type games, the way they did it was very different. And so, I'm curious to see which one we decide we like a little bit more. And I think which game implemented its style of action better. So I'm going to start because we all know a decent amount about Resident Evil 7. I want to kind of lay the groundwork for Dead Space so we know what we're comparing
oh
a little
man,
bit more.
I was gonna say some stuff about it too.
Well, I'm just gonna give a brief little introduction for it.
Okay.
Just from my experience playing the game, I don't think I've ever been more stressed playing a video game than I was playing Dead Space, because it quite literally would throw enemies at you from absolutely nowhere. You would enter a completely bright room, right? And you're like, oh, this room looks safe. There's like a nice little science lab in here. Then all of a sudden the lights go off. They start yelling quarantine, quarantine, and enemies like pop out of cabinets. And you're like, what the hell just happened? And so that's what Dead Space was, though. It was just enemies coming out of nowhere, and then you had to be careful with how you killed them, because you waste ammo just shooting their head or body. You actually have to try to shoot their limbs off. And so you had to be precise with how you did things. And the game also had different weapons that allowed you kind of freedom on how you wanted to tackle enemies. And so for being a horror game that just has enemies jumping out at you, you also had to think smart and figure out how to strategize. And so that's kind of a basic rundown of what I felt about Dead Space. Resident Evil 7 was awesome. Didn't give me that same stress level, though, which is really says something, because Resident Evil is a pretty stressful game.
Yeah, I would say so. I would say so too. One of the things that I think Dead Space was really criticized for, and it could be the fact that it was just shooting off limbs for a lot of the enemies and not trying to waste ammo, is people did call it repetitive. I didn't personally play it myself, but I'm wondering, Mike, do you think that repetition is a fair criticism of the game?
Not necessarily for the first game. I think it got repetitive as the second and third game came out because it was the same trope over and over without mixing up too much else. But I will say by the end of the game, you aren't as afraid. You walk by events, an enemy pops out, and in your head you're like, yeah, I saw that coming, right? It gets a little predictable, but I think that's the one thing where the action side kind of helps because maybe you're not getting scared, but it still pops out and it's enemy you have to kill with limited ammo. So there still is that survival stress aspect of it. So I feel like the horror might go away a bit by the end of the game, but the survival doesn't. And there's still so much psychological stuff going on where you're trying to find your missing girlfriend and you don't even know if she's alive or not. And you start to believe, hey, I think Isaac, the main character, is starting to hallucinate. I don't even think his girlfriend is real. You get to the end of the game and your partner that you were with this whole time just dies in the most shameful way ever by just getting smashed randomly out of nowhere. Like, it's a game that just does things that just, like, hurt your mind. So it becomes a little predictable. I say predictable more than repetitive, but there's other things that make up for it, I would say.
So where I'm at in this one, and one of the things that I actually did notice about Dead Space when seeing some gameplay, one of the things that I think it does really, really well, and I'm going to give it this umbrella term that you can kind of trace it back to more psychological roots and kind of like the fight or flight response. Most of the time, especially when you're first seeing it in Dead Space, is when you see a monster pop out, you're like, all right, F this, I'm out. And that is one of the things that I think Dead Space does really well. I didn't get that as much from watching Resident Evil 7, but it's different because of the context that Resident Evil 7 came into. A lot of people were really wanting that kind of feel of the old school Resident Evil trilogy, not the new Resident Evil trilogy. Resident Evil 4 was fantastic, but it was a pretty big deviation. And when I started going to these, like, you can blow into these undead enemies with a machine gun. Yeah, cool. You're not really horrified. You're literally just fighting different enemies with an assault rifle.
Right.
But the issue is that the context that Resident Evil came into was it was kind of being a return to form, while Dead Space was really going for a more unique approach where it has like a real-time UI. It has such interesting like deferred lighting to try to emphasize those kind of shock value moments. And that's why I'm trying to see if, like, because we usually try to go back to like the legacy that the game has as a good way to tell that did this game really make impacts and strides for the genre. And I'm not sure if that's the right way to weigh these games, because Resident Evil 7, considering the context, doesn't really do that.
Yeah. But Resident Evil 7, and I'll let Travis talk more about this one because I know he played that game. Resident Evil 7 is a lot slower paced. The one thing that I will never forget from Dead Space, and I think you used a perfect term, and that's shock value. There was a scene, and I think it was Dead Space 2, but Dead Space might have had it also, I don't remember, where a baby, like, I forgot what the enemies are called in Dead Space, but one of the baby alien monsters grabs you, holds your mouth open, vomits into your mouth, and your dead sequence is just you vomiting like your intestines out. Like, it's just like, what the hell did I just look at, right? But that's what that game captures so well.
What are you thinking?
Yeah, it's just like, what in the world are you looking at? It's disturbing, and it's awful. That game had some of the most gruesome death scenes I've ever seen. Resident Evil wasn't going for that, right? Resident Evil wasn't going for, oh my god, I can't believe what I'm looking at. So they're very different vibes. That's why maybe it is unfair to say, like, Dead Space's popping outness sets it apart, because Resident Evil 7 didn't want that. But I'll let Travis talk more about his experience with RE7.
Let's see. So, Resident Evil 7 was the first Resident Evil game that I've actually, like, played for a long period of time, and is the first Resident Evil game I completed. I believe I did stream that for the channel, and I beat it in one day. Right? I'm pretty sure.
I think so. If not, maybe 2 days.
Yeah. Anyway, I deeply enjoyed it. Like I say, I'm more of a fan of not having a weapon because it's a safety net for me. Like, a jump scare happens, I literally just shoot something in the face and it falls over, and then I can just run away and I'm good. Whereas a jump scare happens in, like, Outlast, I may or may not be able to escape by just running if it's faster than me, but whatever. Doesn't matter. Resident Evil 7 is because, like, it starts off where are you looking for your wife?
I don't know if she's your wife or your girlfriend, but one or the other.
Anyway, a significant other. And we find her locked up in this house, and then we get trapped there. We later find out that these people are like infested with something. And the bosses just got weirder and weirder throughout the game as the infestation. I don't know if it took over them more or we were just kind of exposing it more because we were shooting it in the face with shotguns constantly. But the thing that I loved most about Resident Evil 7 is how at the end of the game you like found this thing, and it just blew my mind on how it like went full circle in where the story was going. I don't want to spoil it, but like if you played it, then you know what I'm talking about. Is like when you go through that lab and you kind of like find the origins of everything. Because I wasn't expecting to see that. And then I was able to like put the pieces together. I was like, oh my gosh, this was so well thought out. And then like, as like I saw someone else play it, like I saw those little hints that they did give you throughout the entire game.
Yeah.
But I just never thought anything of it.
But I'm wondering, does the compelling narrative of Resident Evil 7, do you think that gives it the edge in terms of Dead Space? Because I've heard different people, and this is why I'll preface it by saying I don't personally believe this, but I do think that certain times it is cheap just to have a jump scare. And people talk about how their favorite horror games aren't just jump scares; they're more of something that gets a little bit more in your mind and makes you think. So if you're going by more of what me and Mike were calling shock value, you'd probably give the edge to Dead Space. But if you're going for more of like a more complex depth and like how things have more layers, I think you'd want to give the edge to Resident Evil 7. And Mike and Travis, you guys can give a little more insight.
I don't know much about Dead Space, so I don't know how deep of a story it has other than just try and find your girlfriend, because I guess in that sense, they both start off the same.
They do.
They both copy each other. How dare they?
Yeah. So to make a good horror game, just lose your girlfriend and try and find her.
I guess.
And then she's a demon.
Because that's also how Outlast 2 is.
That's true.
Oh god, that's the next matchup. Well, some matchup soon.
Later. I think what I will say with Dead Space has a narrative, and it's not a bad narrative, but definitely a simple one. It's not as complex as Resident Evil.
Yeah.
So if we're going for a deep narrative, Resident Evil 7 definitely wins that for me.
Yeah, because I do like a deep narrative, which is why I think it's funny that I enjoy Outlast so much, because its narrative is barely on the surface.
Yeah.
You're traveling through an asylum, man.
Because you want to report it. Even though you see horrible things. Like, really?
Yeah, so...
I just have a video camera. Don't worry about it.
Yeah, but... Because, like, also what Mike was saying, you are so limited on ammo. Like, I don't think I ever even tried to use my shotgun unless I was in a boss fight and I knew I had to get out.
Right.
So, like, even though I had the means to do things to make me feel safe, I was, like, so caught up in my head to not do it. Like, I think I was running through the area with the creepy black crawly things. I don't know if they have a specific name or not. But they were really fast, and I probably only used, like, one pistol ammo to get through the entire part. And then Mike was like, why did you do that to yourself?
Yeah.
But I'm like, I wanted to save my ammo.
Yeah. Well, and that's what that game is, and it's good for, is it's all decisions, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And that's where the horror comes from. Not from being scared, like, weightless from a jump, but from, like, oh my god, there's a big enemy in front of me. I'm running out of bullets. What gun do I use? How do I go about the situation? It's stressful, and I think that's what makes that game fun.
Mm-hmm. And then it also had some really clever puzzles. Like, I really enjoyed, like, grabbing that one, like, figure and then, like, trying to rearrange it to get the shadow to cast properly.
Yes, yeah, those are always pretty cool.
Yeah.
Not to push people, and sorry for interrupting here, but do we want to push it to a vote? We're reaching that time.
Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah, sure.
All right, somebody else go first. Who went first last time?
I don't want to go first.
I'll give mine to Resident Evil 7, mostly because it's just the one I have most experience with, but I was also just really impressed with the franchise, and it gave me a new curiosity for the rest of the games that I know Mike enjoys so much.
Nick, you might need to go. I don't know if I made a decision yet.
Well, do you want me to weigh in a little bit?
Yeah.
on where I'm thinking.
Yeah.
So the way I see it is, I know it's not the most fair to put it on there, but Dead Space was very innovative for what it tried to do, especially with the real-time UI, the really specific lighting that it had. Even though I know lighting's a big thing in horror games, I'm not saying Resident Evil 7 didn't really have that, but it really had a unique aspect when you're thinking about it in Dead Space. But the reason I'm leaning right now towards Resident Evil 7 is because it definitely gives you a little more than just the fight or flight response, because it's giving you the fear, but it's also giving you another layer where it's like, I also want to be conservative here because I still need to survive. It's giving you that fight or flight response, but a little bit on a deeper level, and that's what I kind of like about it. If I feel like I would be playing this game, I would have more of a biochemical reaction, like I'd be sweating more, and I would have like more of adrenaline if I was playing through Resident Evil 7, because it's not just, an enemy, and then it's over. The adrenaline might have died down by then. But you're constantly on your feet in Resident Evil 7. So that's where I'm kind of at.
Okay, well, I guess I don't know. I'm so biased toward Resident Evil that it makes me think Dead Space is the answer, but I'm leaning toward Resident Evil because I'm in love with the franchise, you know? Because I look at what they do. Resident Evil 7 saved Resident Evil because it was going down a horrible path. It was going down this weird action path that was stressful because it sucked, not stressful because it was intense. It wasn't fun. Resident Evil 6 was not a fun game. It was just a bad game in general. And so Resident Evil 7 completely saved the franchise. And I think Resident Evil 2, the remake, was so much inspired by how Resident Evil 7 worked. And so it's the reason Resident Evil is still a loved franchise today. Because it would not be. It would be the 3D Sonic of Capcom. You know? And so I think Resident Evil 7 deserves a lot of credit for that. Dead Space did so much too, though, for horror in general. It was unique in terms of being in space. The enemies were awesome. You had to be witty and clever to solve puzzles in that game. That game had a lot of puzzles too. You use zero gravity to go around. You have to fix the spaceship while enemies are coming at you. It was very stressful because you were in the middle trying to fix something while these enemies are starting to chase in on you, and they're gross and disturbing. So I think both these games deserve to move on. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to vote for Dead Space because they both deserve a vote, and I'm going to let the chips fall where Nick wants them to fall.
I'm not going to lie. I think this is the first time I've been a tiebreaker.
Maybe.
So that's where I was at. Again, I was still leaning towards Resident Evil 7. And I guess I'll pick Mike's brain a little bit more. In terms of a compelling narrative, I'm wondering, do you think that Dead Space has enough of a genuine fear that you get that doesn't just give it more of like a shock value? Because so far most of the horror that I would see is, again, enemies popping out, disturbing, again, the just weird gore about the person like throwing up on, into your mouth. Is there more than just that? Is there anything more that can give it like another layer in your mind?
I think I might finalize your vote here, but honestly, especially for someone like you, no. Like all the big moments for me involve like people that are dying and they like write words with their blood or things like. There's no horror the way that Resident Evil does it, where like you feel depressed, right? Resident Evil's good at that, where like this is a horrible situation. Dead Space was just like, oh my gosh, everyone's dying and gore, you know? So no, I guess. I don't think there is any deep personal narrative in Dead Space. There is a sad story between Isaac and his girlfriend, but that's the only thing, right? I don't think outside of that, there's a lot of deep personal narrative in the game.
Yeah, then sorry, I'll just confirm it then. I am voting for Resident Evil 7 because I did love that story, even though I might not have been in the room because I was scared when they were playing it. But I read the whole thing. Like, I was really engrossed in just what I was reading and how creative that it was. I'm gonna have to vote for Resident Evil 7. So yeah, short discussions, might have a knee-jerk reaction, but hey, Resident Evil 7 moves on.
That's what the first round is all about. So our first semifinals matchup will be Bloodborne versus Resident Evil 7. I cannot wait to see how that one pans out. Let us know if you liked what we picked or if you don't like what we picked. And that's all I'm going to say. Bye, everyone.
Bye.